This is your Thursday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. We're going to have a lot of things to get to today. Chip Scoggins, Star Tribune columnist, will join me in just a little bit here to talk through the Kirill Kaprizov situation. He has a column, Star Tribune, StarTribune.com, about that, his thoughts on why, how we got here with Kaprizov, how he thinks most of this is just posturing and not to worry, but also how this has been far from ideal as the Wild tries to get its best player signed long-term. I'll run through a bunch of your questions as well. We haven't done a listener kind of mailbag for a long time. I wanted to get to that. You guys had a lot of good questions for me on a lot of different things, so let's get to those as well. But first, what did I miss? I'll talk about Teddy Bridgewater for a few minutes here because anytime Teddy's around in the Vikings kind of space, and it's been, a few times already since he left here after the 2017 season, it's just natural to think about the past and that fateful day in training camp in 2016 where he tore knee ligaments, had, very, close potentially to having to have his leg amputated because of such a severe non-contact training camp injury. Now, Teddy, of course, with the Broncos, battling Drew Lock for that starting job, and the Broncos having joint practices with the Vikings late this week before they play on Saturday in the first preseason game for the Vikings at US Bank Stadium. So, Teddy obviously garners a lot of emotions here still. And a lot of people, naturally wonder kind of the what if of it. Even as it gets further out, there's still kind of this what if element of what if that day had never happened. And we're almost 5 years removed from that, by the way. It was late August of 2016 when that injury happened. Obviously missed the whole 2016 season, started a chain of events that have been talked about obviously many times, but it's fresh once again. And if you think I'm the only one or you're the only one who still thinks about that, even Teddy thinks about that. He was interviewed on Wednesday by members of both the Vikings and Broncos press were over there at TCO Performance Center in Eagan, and here is kind of Teddy's perspective on kind of what's happened since that day.
I found myself thinking about it more lately than I have in the past, just about, the day I was injured and up until this point. Because I use it as motivation now, you know what I mean? Before I used to brush it off like, man, it happens, keep going. But now it's just like, man, here I am where I could have been counted out and I almost had to get my leg amputated and things like that. And it's like, man, nah, when I wake up in the morning, I'm blessed. I get an opportunity to put my feet on the ground and go out here and play football, the game that I love to play. So I have so much fun playing this game now, more fun than I've ever had, the more that I think about what I went through here.
That was a great answer. And, I listened to the whole news conference that he gave. Seems like he's in a good headspace right now. Not that he hasn't ever been in a good headspace. Positivity is definitely a hallmark of his makeup. But just listening to him, he sounded like a very confident, mature person. Again, not new for him. Just detected something a little different. Maybe because he's a relatively new dad. Maybe it's just the wisdom of experience and having gone through a lot of things. But I enjoyed listening to him, and I always have enjoyed listening to him. But I want to get to just a little bit is just the what if. 3 questions I still have about that day. 1. Would Kirk Cousins be here right now if Teddy Bridgewater had not been injured? I think the answer to that is a pretty likely no, just based on how much Mike Zimmer loved Teddy Bridgewater and still loves Teddy Bridgewater, and just kind of the watching how the contract he had would have lined up with Kirk Cousins' free agency. I mean, Teddy Bridgewater was a rookie in 2014. He was a first-round pick, the last pick of that first round, which means the Vikings had a 5th-year option on him. So you're looking at 2014, 15, 16, 17, and then 18 would have been that 5th-year option, or the time and the time you started to talk about a possible extension. And obviously 2018 was when Kirk Cousins signed. So let's just assume that Teddy Bridgewater had a reasonably good 2016 season if he doesn't get hurt. same thing going into 2017. I can't imagine how the Vikings would have moved on from that at that point, given how they felt about him. So they wouldn't have gone into the 2018 offseason, looking for a quarterback. They would have had their quarterback of the future. Question number 2 is a little trickier. Would Teddy still be here? And that gets into the question of how much would he have grown? How much, obviously since the injury, he's worked his way back. He was a starter for Carolina, but otherwise he's kind of competed for jobs. Would he have continued on a promising career arc? When you saw him in 2015, Vikings went to the playoffs. They were 11-5 that season, won the division. Bridgewater's numbers were fairly pedestrian, but he was the kind of quote unquote consummate game manager and could have seen his game get even better. Was looking good early in that preseason by all accounts. So would he have still been with the Vikings on a much more, obviously expensive extension by that point? I don't know about that. That's probably, I would say, just given how much they love Teddy Bridgewater, but he would have had at least a decent amount to show in 2016 and again in 2017 to prove that he was the long-term solution. That's the one we'll never really know. We'll just never know what he might have become if he hadn't missed so much development time, if he hadn't had to spend so much time rehabilitating, and whatever the injury has taken away from his mobility and just his ability on the field. We'll never know that. Last one, what's the defensive spending impact? And that's a good question because, immediately they trade for Sam Bradford. They have to pay Bradford in 2016. You start this slippery slope of, what's the effect on the cap? Same thing in 2017. Then they move on from Bradford and Bridgewater and Case Keenum and spend a lot of money on Kirk Cousins. And that takes money away from the defense. You don't have a 2017 first-round draft pick. That maybe could have been a defensive player who was on a reasonable contract for a while as well. So if you're thinking about defensive slippage that happened, was starting to happen a little bit in 2019 and came to the forefront in 2020, having to spend more on quarterbacks, especially kind of in that window where they were primed to win, 2016, 2017, 2018, that was pretty detrimental to their bottom line. And you do wonder how much more they might have been able to do in those years, in particular with a healthy and lower cost quarterback like Teddy Bridgewater. So again, hard to relitigate the past. It's a tough question. The bottom line is you got to be happy for Teddy Bridgewater that he's on the field, that he sounds so happy to play, and I'll be excited to see him play, even if it's just the preseason on Saturday.
I'm Chris Hine, Timberwolves beat writer at the Star Tribune and the first 5-time guest in daily delivery history. Thank you for listening to this podcast. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast, our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, and even all of Rand's future blog posts about how the Timberwolves should trade for players they will never get, go to startribune.com/subscribe.
Going to bring in Chip Scoggins now. Chip does a great job covering all sorts of things for the Star Tribune as one of our columnists, and has a column in Thursday's paper about Kirill Kaprizov. Chip Scoggins, how you doing today?
I am doing great, Michael. How are you?
Good. Good to have you back on the show. You have a column in Thursday's newspaper and on StarTribune.com, kind of giving your thoughts on the Kirill Kaprizov negotiations, as it were, and it's been a little bit more tense, I think, than people might have wanted it to be. You'd love this to have been resolved, 6 weeks ago, but here we are. It's August 12th, and nothing is settled yet. And in fact, there was the report earlier this week that he's got this $10 million offer to play in Russia. Let's just kind of from the jump. What's your overall sense of all this and the negotiations and even behind the scenes?
Well, I will say, when has anything ever gone smoothly with Kirill Kaprizov and contract related and status related? So we shouldn't be surprised. This feels like negotiating 101 with, I guess we could call him budding superstar or superstar in the making.
That's what I've called him a budding superstar a couple times.
Yeah.
I think you don't want to like jump the gun, but that 1 year was awfully good.
Yeah. He's not, he's not Crosby, he's not one of the top 3 players, but he's a star. And this is just what you have to go through. I mean, we're talking about the most talented and most entertaining player they've had in their history. And he knows that. His agent knows that. And so I don't think it would be realistic to think this would be smooth sailing. Do I think he's going to go play in Russia? No. I think that's a total bluff. As we were talking before we got on here, at the core, professional athletes are competitors, and competitors want to test themselves against the best competition. The NHL is the best hockey league in the world. And we saw from last year from Kaprizov that he's a pretty hard-nosed competitor and, loves facing the best players. So you're telling me he's going to go play junior varsity now because he's mad because he didn't get what he wanted entirely? I would say at minimum, Michael, right? At minimum, he's probably looking at from the Wild at $35 million guaranteed. And I say that for, let's say he gets, or 36, let's say he gets 4 years. Let's say they settle on 4 years for $9 million. Okay. Yep. That's probably the worst he's going to do, right? At this point. Because I don't think Billy Guerin's going to budge on the 3. He's not. You can't do 3. That's
too much.
Yeah.
That's basically giving him everything he wants.
That means you have no leverage, which is not impossible. Now, if I'm Kaprizov's camp, there's no way in heck I would take an 8-year deal. Why would you do that when you might be a superstar in 4 years and one of the best players in the league, and you could get a gigantic bite of the apple then. So they're going to meet in the middle. It's going to be 4 or 5 years. Let's say 9 years, $36 million. Are you really going to, risk? Are you going to go play in an inferior league? One, are you going to risk potentially getting a serious injury? And if he plays in Russia for 1 year, the Wild still has his contract rights. So you're just
for 2 more years after that.
For 2 more years, he doesn't come unrestricted free agent until 2024 that summer. So, I think this it's not enjoyable, and I know fans, as I wrote in my column, we have MSA, Minnesota Sports Anxiety. Anytime something like this comes up, people assume the worst, and we just think everything's going to fall apart. Ideally, it wouldn't be this difficult and this complicated, but it is, and I don't think we should be surprised, but I also don't think you're going to see the nuclear option where they have to trade him or he winds up playing in Russia for 3 years.
Why couldn't this be easy? You think is it just representation? Is it just that both sides have a certain amount of leverage here and deals are getting structured differently in the NHL? It's like these guys don't want the 8-year contracts anymore because they've figured out that, hey, if we can get the shorter term and the same amount of, money per year, then we hit free agency again in our prime instead of, in our early 30s, essentially.
Yeah, I think it's because a number of factors. One, I think his camp knows, holy cow, look what the year he had. If he had an average year, it would be easy because they wouldn't have the leverage. He won the Calder trophy. He's the best rookie. He's their best player. Everybody knows he's the best player they've ever had. I mean, just look at the production he put up. And so I'm sure his side's saying, wait a second here. That adds another 0 to the, And so, and they're looking at it as, because of his age, I mean, this is not a 21-year-old kid or a 19-year-old kid. I mean, he wants to get that next big contract when he's in his prime, not when he's 34, And so they look at it as, hey, if you can get a shorter deal and you stack up a couple of really good years, the market for you is going to be through the roof. And so they're holding up that ground. And, from the Wild's perspective, a couple things. One, he's your best player. And so you're building everything around him. And you would love to have him long-term and start and finish his career, I would think. Lock him up to long-term so he doesn't get the unrestricted free agency, and you have to give him a massive contract there. And then the other thing is, too, as great as he was, Michael, he only played 55 games.
Yeah.
He had 55 games of NHL experience. And so I think we can all see it and say, hey, yeah, he's special, but it's still a pretty small resume, and it's not like he dominated the playoffs either. He had a couple nice moments, and I thought he did okay. He didn't score, but I thought he, at the clip that we thought. But it's not like he was their best player in the playoffs, I don't think. And so they're probably saying, hey, let's see it a little more before we, are willing to do that. And so I think that's why it's complicated, because of the year he had, and then also, just the way contracts are being structured now. If I was a player in his position, there is no way I'd want. Someone would say, yeah, I want the long. If you're an average player, you probably say, yeah, I want the long-term security. Give me that 8-year contract because I know this is what I'm getting. But if you're a player that you feel like, hey, I could be a top 5 player in 3 years in this league, I want another bite at that apple when I'm a top 5 player, to be honest with you.
Now, what's the best case scenario you think for the Wild? A 5-year deal? Is that about as much as you think they're going to get?
Yeah, I really don't think it'll go beyond that. And if Billy Guerin's being realistic, they probably have to think 4 to 5 is going to be the sweet spot for them. And that's, that would take him to what age? 30? Was he 25 now?
He's 24 now. So he turns 25, I think, in April. So, he's.
So, yeah, it'd take him close to 30. And then you reevaluate, see where you're at. So I think 4 or 5 years definitely would not get to do the 3-year deal.
No.
I think that's too short a time frame that you would risk losing him. So I think, 4 or 5 is probably where they're landing. If you're the Wild, if you could get 5. That would probably be ideal for what you're looking for. And then I would say in that $9 to $10 million range per year, I think that's probably what you're going to have to pay for him.
Now, hardly ideal that, assuming this happens and that it is in the 4 to 5 year range, that a lot of those years are going to overlap with the heavy Suter Parisi buyout years. And it's going to be hard to build a team around him when you've got, 12, 14, 15 million in dead cap charges some of those years. Well,
and that's the thing. I mean, I understand what Guerin was doing, but he definitely made life more difficult with him, particularly the Suter one. But you can't cut corners with your best player and your superstar. That's not where you get it from. You get it on somewhere else. And they are forcing themselves to really develop their young players and have to rely on I don't want to call it cheap labor, but guys on their entry level.
Yeah. Early restricted free agency too. When they're
correct.
Not,
yeah.
Making as much.
Rossi, Boldy, all these young guys that are coming through the system, they're going to have to contribute in a big way, and maybe a year or two quicker than they probably would like or expected. But when you made those decisions and with the buyouts, and you said we're willing to take on that dead money and eat up the cap space, that narrows your opportunities to go out and plug holes or fill gaps in your roster with veterans and established players. It's going to have to come from young guys, and maybe all the reports are high on these young guys, and maybe some of them will, but it definitely reduces your margin of error in terms of being able to fix problems.
You and I are of the same mind that this gets done. I think we're in agreement about the approximate term and money. What my next question presupposes, though, Chip, is what if it doesn't? What if it doesn't work out? How Minnesota, unfortunately, would it be if this blows up and he does play in Russia next year? If this becomes untenable and they feel like they have to either trade him or it becomes this thing that festers?
Well, I would slow play it before I would trade him. I will say that. I would not trade him because that is the absolute worst case scenario to me. Now you could say, well, you'd be getting something back and pieces, but I would slow play it. And if he did go play in Russia, which I don't think he would, it at least buys you some time to figure out how to fix it in the subsequent years. Is he really going to go play?
I I don't think so. I'm just saying,
AHL
what,
for 3 years.
Probably not, but like,
it would be a very bad day. It would be. I can't even imagine both on the ice and selling tickets and optics about being able to get things done. It would be a very bad strike for Bill Guerin's regime, because I don't say he's the only thing you're building around, but he's the centerpiece to this.
Absolutely.
To this vision and plan that they're doing. And so if you take that away, even for a year, what are you doing?
Yeah. I mean, is there one player more important in this whole market right now than him?
Of any sports?
Yeah.
Hi.
Like Towns, maybe?
Or I'd say Karl Anthony Towns. It'd be the same way where if they got to, if Towns did what we seen in the NBA and said, I'm tired of losing, I want to go somewhere else, you're basically taking that blueprint and ripping it up and starting over. And that's what this would be too. So I would not trade Kaprizov, even if you feel like you're, beating your head against the wall and you're getting nowhere. I would not turn to that option because then what are you doing? Yeah. So let's not go down that path.
I don't think it's going to happen. I just say you gotta cover all of our bases here.
That's right.
Last thing for you, and good column, read Chip's column on Star Tribune, StarTribune.com. You're going to be at Vikings this weekend, the first preseason game. I feel like that snuck up on me a little bit because we had so much off-field stuff at the beginning of camp with the COVID, the vaccine story. I can now fully divert my attention to worries about the offensive line. Because that's still a problem, isn't it?
Yeah. And I don't know how many of the starters are going to play, if they play much at all. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of them don't dress, but, for all the talk on draft night and in the draft aftermath about, they fixed the offensive line, they repaired it.
I didn't buy it for a minute, but
Michael, it could be worse.
Yes, it could be.
It could be worse.
Riley Reif was their second best offensive lineman last year. They got rid of him.
Or it might have been 1A. He might have been.
Well, O'Neal.
We can say O'Neal, but it wasn't a big drop. Yeah.
No, they had two good tackles and nobody on the interior line.
He was definitely their second best. Yeah. And Rashad Hill?
Rashad Hill is a perfectly fine number 3 tackle. Perfectly good swing tackle. But the minute he becomes plan A because Darisaw is hurt or not ready or some combination of both, and if Wyatt Davis isn't practicing with the ones right now, if it's Oli Udoh, at the start of the year.
Yeah. And it is going to be, I think. Unless something dramatic changes here in the next couple of weeks. He's not. It sort of seems like they're settling in on what it's going to be now. Injuries or whatever can change that. But I was one of those. Maybe I shouldn't be this naive, but I thought things were so bad that those I almost called them freshmen, those rookies had a realistic chance to start on day one. And maybe that's maybe that was just foolish, naive of me. But I thought even knowing there'd be growing pains and some learning curve with them, that it was going to be an upgrade from what they had last year and what they had on the roster. And it's not promising, I would say. I'm not optimistic about the line right now.
Everything weird that's happened so far this year has been on the offense, not the defense. So we'll see. Mike Zimmer's going to have to win games like 6-3. He's going to love it.
I will say this. Yeah, he'd probably love it. I will say this. Their skill guys are still pretty darn good.
They are. As long as Jefferson's healthy, they're
yeah.
Cousins, Cook, Irv Smith, Jefferson, Thielen. Yeah, they're fine.
I think the offensive line will be good enough to where those skill guys you're still going to score. But my expectations were, if that line was an upgrade, that this absolutely should be a top 10 scoring offense. He finished 11th last year, and you look at the guys they have, and I think Irv Smith's going to have a good year. It should be a top 10, but is that line going to be good enough to allow them to be a great offense and not just a pretty good one? I don't know. I think the jury's out still.
certainly not a narrative that played out in 2020 or 2018 or 2016. So, we got that going for us. It's never happened except for 3 times in the last 6 seasons. So, all right, man. Thanks. Good stuff. Follow Chip, read his column, and check for his work this weekend at the Vikings, and we'll have you back on soon. All right, man?
Thanks, man.
Good stuff from Chip, as always. I've been thinking a little bit more about Kaprizov and what, the unlikely event that he doesn't come back here this year, that he does go play in Russia, and that something doesn't somehow get worked out long term. And he, it feels like the only comparison I could think of in my head was Stephon Marbury and how he pushed his way out of Minnesota. We just got a glimpse of how good that could be, and then he was gone. That's how it would feel if Kaprizov somehow, if this didn't get resolved. But like Chip and I talked about, I feel like that will get resolved. Let's run through a bunch of your questions to finish up the show here. Good one from at UC Mongo. You think Jax and Ober are the real deal for the Twins, as in starters the Twins can build around, or are they flashes in the pan like Scott Diamond? Hadn't thought about Scott Diamond for a while. It's an interesting question. Both of them have pitched well lately. Bailey Ober, another good outing for the Twins. They beat the White Sox 1-0 on Wednesday. Took the series 2 games out of 3. That's, 5 out of 7 against Houston and Chicago. 2 good series wins. I mean, too little, too late for this season. But, if you're just evaluating prospects, if you're trying to figure out what you've got going forward, you'd much rather win than lose. So at least some promising signs for the future there. As for those 2 specific pitchers, I'm not sure. I think we need a larger body of work for both of them. I think they've both, got a chance. I think Ober in particular, his stuff has improved enough. He's added some velocity to some of his pitches that he's more intriguing than he ever used to be. But we need more time. I think the bigger thing is they've got a lot of guys now where they want to get a look at them. They've got a larger sampling to choose from as they try to pick out some of these young pitchers who might be able to help them in the future. And, certainly those guys have pitched well lately. If they do it more, down the stretch in these last 6, 7, 8 weeks, I'd feel better about 2022. But let's see another, 6 or 7 starts from both of them before we make any kind of final evaluation on that. At Tony V 433, that's an interesting question. Obviously, in conjunction with the Field of Dreams game, which is tonight in Iowa. I've been to Field of Dreams before. It's pretty cool. Which site in a state without a baseball team would you like to see an MLB game at? And I don't know why. This is a weird answer, and it doesn't even, follow the guidelines, the guideposts that he set. But I would, for some reason, my mind went straight to the Grand Canyon. And how I would love to see a game at the Grand Canyon, whether it's like, inside at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, I'm sure it'd be super hot, or if it was like kind of at the rim of the Grand Canyon and any home run or foul ball could just go straight into this void. I don't know why I thought of that, but as I tried to think of something else, my mind kept coming back to the Grand Canyon. So that is my answer. I am fully aware that there is a team in Arizona already. But that's my final answer, and I'm sticking to it. At Colin Solberg wants to know, are Twins page views down in line with the Twins TV ratings? Royce alluded to it earlier in the week. I got to admit, I haven't studied our page views for the Twins quite as closely. Good chance for me to promote, by the way. Dave St. Peter will be on tomorrow's show, and we will talk about those Twins TV ratings that I had reported on earlier this week that are way down in 2021. I would just say, in general, page views, interest in a team goes down when they don't play as well. And I'm sure there's probably been a hit to people reading StarTribune.com, Star Tribune content about the Twins, because when they're losing, people just don't want to hear about it. They tune it out. So I would say my hunch is yes. I don't know if it's as dramatic, though, as the TV ratings, because sometimes people do love to read about a train wreck. They like the controversy. They do. That's a fact. Real Super Dave wants to know, is there a chance that on Saturday the Vikings crowd cheers for Teddy and then boos Kirk Cousins? This kind of gets back to my original segment on how much people still love Teddy Bridgewater, the past, the present, the future. I think Teddy will absolutely get cheers when he comes out on Saturday. I don't think Kirk will get booed, though. That'd be pretty weird. I mean, unless there's still this lingering thought about everything that's been happening with the vaccine talk. I don't think so, though. There might be a smattering. There might be a little bit of discontent, but I can't imagine somebody getting booed at a preseason game. Blake31 wants to know, why doesn't MLB do a better job of marketing their star players? Can they ever get back to the 80s and 90s marketing? That's a great question. That's kind of their big problem, one of their big problems, and part of it is they've fallen behind in that standpoint, and I think they absolutely can do a better job. I don't know what the secret sauce is, though. They've been trying and working at this, but basketball has really taken the lead in this marketing of stars. The fans sit close. It's this cool thing that people can go and watch. And, baseball just kind of has a distance between the stars and the fans. And I think it's more a function of the waning popularity of baseball than anything that MLB is specifically doing wrong with the marketing of players. Finally, Pearl Rose wants to know, is a Minnesota sports team going to win a championship in my lifetime? I don't know how old Pearl is. Based on her profile picture, it looks like she is an adult at least. So in her lifetime, the Lynx have won 4 championships, so let's not discount that. But let's say we're talking about from this point forward, is somebody going to win a championship in her lifetime? Yeah, I mean, the law of averages just says yes, that will happen. I know in the major, quote unquote, major men's pro sports that we still talk about the original 4, so to speak, of baseball, basketball, hockey, and football. They haven't played for a championship even in 30 years since the Twins won in 91. So it's hard to be optimistic about that. I get it. But yes, it's going to happen. Pearl Rose and everybody else out there. Can't tell you when, can't tell you why, can't tell you who, can't tell you how, but it's going to happen. Like I said, Dave St. Peter on the show Friday. Looking forward to that. Got some good stuff coming up next week as well. Looking forward to hopefully talking to Joe Rossi, defensive coordinator for the Gophers football team. Thinking I might have Spencer Hall on the show too to talk some Gopher football, some college football. Always enjoy catching up with Spencer. Does an awesome job. One of the funniest guys I know. So look for that next week. Thanks for joining me today. Be back at it on Friday.